Thank you, Eric. So good to be with you guys, though I missed the shield thing. Maybe it's floating down a river somewhere with a Viking princess who has died. I do love that thing. I want to say thank you to 1517 for having me again, and also sort of as someone who's a semi-outsider, to say thank you to 1517 for sustaining so many of us over these past, when was the last time we had this conference? 3 years, 2.5 years. It just goes to show you that the work that Chad and Scott spoke about last night, but that we all experience, this sort of online ministry and witness and podcasts and blogs and all that stuff, being in person is so fantastic, but what they do day in, day out deserves a whole lot of recognition. You know, we give the internet such a hard time for destroying everything about society. I think that the hard work that goes into 1517 shows that perhaps there's something worth keeping in the zeros and the ones. And I thought that I was going to, instead of sort of in tribute to the internet, I am going to rely on memes in this talk. Now, I was deeply insulted the other day by a colleague of mine who said, "Dave, I love you and the new book is great, but I have to admit your meme game is really pathetic. You are a 45-year-old man and you post memes that a 45-year-old man would post." And that was not a compliment. You know, basically dad memes are kind of like, there's dad jokes and then there's dad memes. And we all know what they are. And so I thought today, I was like really taken aback, and I thought, well, if I'm gonna speak at 1517, I have a chance to not only pay tribute to the internet, but in doing so, pay tribute to my favorite part of the internet, which is meme culture. And and not only that, I can do it in a way that reclaims my dominance in the meme game. So you're all pawns in an ego-centric quest that I am doing today. But in order to get there, before we get to the memes, don't worry, they're coming. I wanted to talk about, the title of my talk today is Jesus, Forgiveness, and Low Anthropology. I want to sort of reverse it and say low anthropology, forgiveness, and Jesus. And as I was flying here and thinking about what exactly I wanted to say, I was thinking about where is this touching down right now? This idea of low anthropology, which I'm about to explain, but sort of the gospel message as it relates to our lived experience as people who, yes, are Christians and are in the church, but also just people in the world. Where is it playing out? And I saw a powerful example of it as it relates primarily to women, and then I saw one that relates primarily to men. Now, there's a book that came out this past week called The Gospel of Wellness. The Gospel of Wellness is written by a woman named Rena Raphael, and there's a big, long feature in The Atlantic about it. And one of the things that Rena writes, she says, we live lives that demand too much of us. We live lives that demand too much of us. Wellness, and I'm in California, which spans both real groundbreaking solutions and total bunk, is the direct response to genuine complaints. In other words, people are suffering, and we are being demanded so much of in this always-on attention economy that we live in, that of course we're reaching for any solution we can to soothe us, to comfort us. She writes, the more burdens we accumulate, children, aging parents, student loans, mortgages, anxiety disorders, bad backs, extra pounds, the more we're urged to be well by way of still more effort. Throwing out our plastic containers, cutting out lectins, practicing mindfulness, learning about environmental toxins, doing the research. Somewhere along the way, the thing that was supposed to help us heal ourselves became yet another obligation. Indeed, wellness puts the onus on the consumer to make up for everything modern society can't or won't provide. It extends the illusion of control. She concludes by saying, women are promised that they can manage the chaos ruling their life by following a laid-out plan, eat right, exercise, meditate, then buy or do all this stuff. Now, wellness may not be something that you relate to, but it's in the air we breathe, for sure. And, actually, Gwyneth Paltrow didn't actually create it. She just sort of peddles it. And again, it's a response to a genuine cry of the heart. Life is too hard. I am too broken. I need to heal myself. I need some self-care. But what this writer seems to say is that the means of medicating or healing ourselves is only making us more exhausting and becomes a whole new job to undertake. So that's sort of maybe something that sort of relates a little bit more to women than men. But men, on the other hand, another book came out 2 weeks ago called Of Boys and Men by a guy at the Brookings Institute, who reported that almost half of all men today report having 3 close friends or fewer. Between 1990 and 2021, the percentage of men who reported to have no close friends quintupled from 3% to 15%. The percentage who reported 10 or more close friends shrank from 40% to 15%. So women are overburdened with self-care, and men are as lonely as they've ever been, and full of despair, and no one sees them. Now, I think both of these issues are actually indicative of what I'll call a high anthropology. A high anthropology which has an over-optimistic view of human nature. In one case, there's the sense that you can do it all, you can know it all, you can care about it all, you can cure it all, if you only try hard enough or spend enough money. On the other hand, that's a high anthropology. That's what we call burnout, which is produced when you have overly high expectations of what a human being, or unrealistic expectations of what a human being is capable of. But then you have loneliness, which connotes to sort of people feel lonely when they don't feel known or they don't feel able to be known. When there's no allowance for weakness or frailty. Men or whomever are not given permission to evince the slightest weakness. And so, of course, they feel alone because no one feels known for only their resume virtues. Now, this idea of loneliness, this plays into my first meme, and this is a bit of a dad one. Let's show it. This is the great motto of the low anthropology. What you have here is a crowded city street of people going this way and that way. You have men and women, old and young, and everyone looks maybe slightly stressed out, but essentially they look like islands. They're not talking to each other, and yet they're all have bubbles going up to the same exact refrain. They're all thinking the same thing. They're all united in not their virtues, but their loneliness. I ask people when I don't have PowerPoint, and by the way, I sprung this PowerPoint on Daniel about 10 minutes before the presentation. So thank you, Daniel and Tate, for bearing with my supreme I say, like, what do you think? Imagine the city street with all these people going the same way, and they're all actually thinking the same thing. What do you think they're thinking? And I asked some people in Tennessee, and some lady in the back said, WTF. That's what everyone's thinking. I said, close. All these people really seem to have it together, and I still have no idea what's going on. Talk to anyone who's in ministry or anyone in the helping professions, and they will tell you that everyone seems to think they're the only ones making it up as they go, barely hanging on, not really knowing, pretending to be an adult, and just keeping the lid on, but just barely. What that cartoon shows us, that meme, it's a sort of a key to something universal. Something universal in that we all know what we're divided by today. We're divided by every conceivable category, but it turns out we're united in our confusion. We are united in our inability to control our lives or the world around us. We are united not in our high anthropology, but in our low anthropology. And the fact that all of you laughed and felt known by that cartoon is a hopeful thing. And we all felt together for a moment, did we not? Now, that cartoon's actually getting at is something called imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. And again, you just talk to the preachers in the room and they will tell you that imposter syndrome is not a syndrome at all. It's the human condition. Everyone feels like they don't belong, that they're the only ones with problems. It's just universally true. I preached a sermon about imposter syndrome, and the most intimidating person there was this woman who was like the first physics professor at UVA in Virginia, where I'm at. And she's always like extremely well put together and well coiffed, and I think her husband is a little afraid of her, but and she walks out, and I always don't know what she's going to say. It's always sort of like a veiled criticism of the sermon. So you're sort of like, oh, what is he going to say to me? And she said, David, thank you for that sermon on imposter syndrome. I lived for the last 35 years afraid that someone would find out that I never passed my first prereq for my physics dissertation. And I said, well, you told the wrong person. But if even she is afraid of being found out, well, then there's hope for us all. This low anthropology thing has legs. They're my legs, and they're your legs. Now, what do I mean when I say low anthropology? Because I was told not to use this as a title for anything, let alone a book. Anthropology, I'm not using it like a college professor would, to talk about, tribes in the Australian outback. I'm using it philosophers and theologians often talk about your anthropology. It's actually shorthand. It's a way to refer to your operating view of human nature. When you say the words, I'm only human, what do you mean by that? Everyone means something. Everyone has some operating view of human nature. It may be different than the one you consciously espouse. It may be some sort of combination of things. It may be all sorts of contradictory, but everyone has some view of human nature, and it creates expectations in their relationships and in their relationship with themselves, to say nothing of their relationship with God. I chart anthropologies on a continuum of high to low. You can think of it as a barometer of human potential. On the high end, you find the sunnier estimations of what women or men are like. Think of it as like the California end of the spectrum, okay? I'm kidding. Am I kidding? You run into grander visions of human enterprise. Silicon Valley is basically high anthropology capital of the world that only gets rich because of our low anthropology. But anyway, the higher we get, the more optimistic the assumptions about what human beings, what men and women are capable of. On the low end of the spectrum sit the more sober estimations. You find understandings of the human spirit as something that veers by default, like with bad wheel alignment, in a sort of a malign direction. That people are limited, that they're conflicted, that they're self-centered, that we cannot flourish without assistance or constraint. We are finite, we are blind, and in many cases, quite weak. In other words, no one really knows what they're doing. Anne Lamott is probably the patron saint of low anthropology, at least in this state. I'll quit with the California jokes. I guess they're... Though I was really appreciative of sort of the Beach Boys style liturgical folk number. That was amazing. That was great. Ryan, I want to get that on MP3. Anne Lamott articulates a low anthropology when she says, everyone is screwed up, broken, clingy, and scared. Even the people who seem to have it more or less together, they are much more like you than you would believe. So try not to compare your insides to their outsides. That's a low anthropology. And if you note your emotional response to that, I don't want my kid to say, hey, Dad, guess what I learned at school today? I'm broken, clingy, scared. You're like, no, you're awesome. You're my special little guy. Now please tie your shoes. It's like, don't hit your brother again. So A high anthropology views people as defined by their best days and their greatest achievements, by their dreams and their aspirations. A low anthropology doesn't dismiss those things. In fact, it celebrates those things with awe and appropriate wonder. But a low anthropology assumes that when it comes to you and me, there's a more reliable through line of heartache and self-doubt, that the bulk of our mental energy is focused on subjects that would be embarrassing or even shameful if broadcast, and that our ability to do the right thing in any given situation is hampered by all sorts of unseen factors. Now, a low anthropology is my really euphemism for a Christian anthropology, a biblical anthropology, an Augustinian anthropology, a Lutheran one even. And I say it rests on 3 pillars. 3 pillars, all of which make for amazing memes. First pillar of low anthropology is limitation. You and I, this is not really a moral category here. You and I are created beings. We're not God. And therefore we have real limits. We are limited by our biology. We are limited by time itself. We are limited by our mortality. We cannot be in 2 places at once, as anyone who's tried knows. But more than that, in a world of warring certainties, no one can actually know everything about anything. You can know a lot about some things. But since you are not God, you do not have access to the full span of evidence or facts. When it comes to your wife, your child, even yourself, to say nothing about this or that situation or problem. A low anthropology embraces in its limitations that there is something fundamentally uncertain about what it means to be a human. In that I cannot, in fact, do it all. And when I try to, I burn out. I cannot know it all, and when I act like I do, I create alienation, division, and resentment. And I cannot care about it all, because that creates just complete meltdown if you feel like you have to take on the emotional burden of a world that's suffering. This is my translation of creatureliness, and we can look at the next meme. It sort of describes what I'm talking about. I think it's funny, right? So for those at home, you have a mug, and you have David and Goliath, but it says above Goliath, it says Goliath, and above David, it says not you. I think that's funny. Because, the second pillar of a low anthropology is what I call doubleness. It's what Lutherans call the bondage of the will. It means that we are conflicted inside. We are not free agents making healthy decisions, but we are tied in all sorts of knots, and that our willpower is supremely limited, especially when it gets to the things that matter the most. As the emotional import of something in our life increases, our ability to sort of have dominion or agency seems to decrease, and it feels like a curse, right? There is something in all of us which causes us to cry out with Ovid, the Latin poet, to say nothing of St. Paul, I see and approve the better things of life, but the evil things I do. We are not rational beings. We are emotional creatures bound by what Augustine would say are our desires, which are disordered and overwhelming. And we're all together in this. So this sort of translates in a sort of a Christian way to this next meme. Now to find out who's been sabotaging my walk with Christ. A doubleness refers to, again, conflictedness. Anyone who's dealt with addiction knows what we're talking about, that you functionally oftentimes act as your own worst enemy. And that if you don't understand this about other people, by the way, you will not only, people think, oh, that sounds like a negative thing about human nature. And to be honest with you, if you don't understand this about other people, you will come to hate them. Because you will assume that if I just tell you what to do, you'll do it. If you have access to the right information, well, then you're home free. And that has never worked in your marriage. It's never worked with your children. It's never worked on a macro scale. And because it's working with it's like a different species that would apply to. If I just give you the right information, well, then we will all act in accordance with wisdom and goodness. No, I wish it were true, but it's not. We are like Fred, sabotaging ourselves. The third pillar of a low anthropology is the one that is freighted with morality, and it is what I call self-centeredness, my translation of sin, that you and I are, there's a dark side of human nature, that when my children are in the back seat of my car and I say, don't pinch your brother, the next thing that happens is the brother gets pinched. And then it escalates from there. And with each person justifying their own selfish ambition. And it gets ugly until I throw them out of the car and speed away and go to California. No, we are all inheritors. Like the modern word for this is usually bias. That's the closest the sort of secular culture can get to talking about sin. Something that is not consciously chosen but inherited, that you have a very, part of its trickery is that you don't really see it as such. You're sort of blind to how it affects you, but it does affect you, and it tends to make you act in all sorts of ways that are almost like hurtful. That is, so I think that would kind of, I want to go to the next one here. This is a slightly more serious meme. This is self-centeredness. This is, I think, like even as Christians, there's something, this is it's not supposed to be funny. It's not. This is not supposed to be mocking. This is what human beings do. We take even our Lord's suffering and we make it into something about ourselves, in a way to draw attention to ourselves. Hey, I was there on the big day. You know, when that is precisely what Christ is going to atone for. And yet you have these three pillars. You have what Anne Lamott says. You have a low anthropology. And this is where G.K. Chesterton can help us. He says that Christianity preaches an obviously unattractive idea, such as original sin. And low anthropology is more than sin. It's, again, limitless, doubleness. But when we wait for its results, of this doctrine, they are brotherhood and a thunder of laughter and pity. This is the great irony of low anthropology, that what sounds insulting is actually liberating, and what sounds liberating at first is actually oppressive and embittering. Think about it in your own life. I think a low anthropology is the key to friendships to blossom. In our town, I live in I think what's the second highest wedding destination in America, Charlottesville, Virginia. I guess it's like neutral territory. And there's a lot of vineyards and mountains and stuff like that. So we've done all these weddings because there was this backlog because of COVID. And one thing you'll notice is that anytime you're at a wedding, anytime you hear a toast, unless it's the father of the bride, you will hear not high anthropology, you will hear low anthropology. Listen for it. The toasts of the groomsmen and the bridesmaids, they are never, she looks so beautiful, you are immaculate, you're the most talented woman I know, I just can't get over the fact that I'm even invited here. That's never, you'll hear maybe that for 10 seconds, but then you'll hear, but let me tell you what she's like in her sweatpants on a Monday night when she's watched reality TV for 12 hours straight. Because that's where our relationship was formed. Not on the mountaintop, but in the valley of mundanity. As well as the times when she was crying because this person broke her heart. The groomsmen are all sort of like, they're just a straight up roast. You know? This guy is the worst. I can't believe he married anyone. And yet I love him. I love him. If you want to find someone to take you to McDonald's at 2 a.m. when you've had too much to drink, this is your guy. You know, that's what you hear. And you realize all of a sudden, oh my gosh, love in the world travels along the lines of low anthropology, not high anthropology. There's no better place to see what the upshot of a low anthropology is than Alcoholics Anonymous, which I think the temple, I mean, you walk into those doors of usually the church basement, you say, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm an addict. It's a community bound together by shared weakness, and it's therefore a real community. And therefore a transformative one. Good churches, as we know, sometimes function similarly. My favorite picture of an AA meeting is a meme. You get it? Come on. Now that one is a dad meme. I mean, there's no question. But what if you found out the whole talk was built along me showing you this? Wouldn't that be? There you go. There's an AA meeting. That's for you, Jacob. But I was thinking about this as it relates to the world in which we live and the way that low anthropology has been obscured, and we tell ourselves these flattering stories about who we are and what we're capable of and our motivations, and we rarely feel the permission to tell the truth. I've been reading a book called Faith, Love, and Carnage by Nick Cave. And he's a singer-songwriter from Australia and a very sort of dark guy, but he's a Christian. And he was asked what kind of questions in particular where you say religion is more adept at answering than secularism. This is what he said. He said, religion deals with the necessity for forgiveness, for example, and mercy, whereas I don't think secularism has found the language to address these matters. The upshot of that is a kind of callousness towards humanity in general, meaning an inability to talk about forgiveness. Or so it seems to me. And I think callousness comes out of a feeling of aloneness, people feeling adrift or separated from the world. And in a way, they look for religion and meaning and belonging elsewhere. And increasingly, they are finding it in tribalism and the politics of division. If you've read Seculosity, I've tried to talk about that there. And then the interviewer says, the decline of organized religion may be one reason for that, but there are others, of course, social and political. Nick says, well, whatever you think about the decline of organized religion, and I do accept that religion has a lot to answer for, it took with it a regard for the sacredness of things, for the value of humanity in and of itself. This regard is rooted in a humility towards one's place in the world, an understanding of our flawed nature. We are losing that understanding, as far as I can see, and it's often being replaced by self-righteousness and hostility. So the fruit of a high anthropology, in other words, is not us feeling better about ourselves, but us hating other people more, categorizing into kingdom come. I saw a great meme that has to do with this exact thing. You can show it. It's actually more of like a tweet. I thought it was funny. Bro, I cannot wait for when I am without sin. First thing I'm going to do is cast the first stone. It's really easy to condemn other people when you think you're not basically prone to the same exact condition as they are. That's what this is. What a brilliant formulation that is. There's Jacob, spider. But you'll note that a high anthropology is not just a secular thing. No, we in the church have it in spades. But for us, it's more of a selectively high anthropology. People are confronted with their own limitation, their own doubleness, and their own self-centeredness, and they hear about a God who forgives them, who offers them pardon and mercy and forgiveness and absolution and an opportunity for redemption. And they flock. They get excited. And then you get into the church, and over time, maybe not explicitly, but sometimes just implicitly, there becomes, slowly you get the sense that now Christians are sort of, have to kind of go back to the law. There's a new law, but it becomes a new ladder to climb. Until finally, it escalates to the point you're like, well, I thought I was escaped all this. I'm out of here. That's a selectively high anthropology. Let me say this. Selectively high anthropology is the tie that binds together nearly every account of religious burnout and disillusionment. It is the foundation of legalistic and oppressive forms of religion without which they cannot find oxygen. High anthropology to religion devastates. It ruins lives. It creates a suicidal attitude toward the world. Anytime you hear someone refer to a former religious observance with some form of, I just couldn't keep it up anymore, you are in the vicinity of a high anthropology. Because a high anthropology pits a person against themselves in a battle they cannot win while cutting off their only hope of redemption or salvation, which is God himself. So, I thought I'd take the rest of this talk to look about what does a religion of low anthropology look like? Because that's what 1517 is really about. That's where it derives its power. When I first came to faith in a real way, I remember hearing from Rod Rosenblatt that the gospel applies even to Christians. And thinking to myself, praise the Lord for that. That is a view based in, yes, Luther's Siemels, but it is a view that takes into account ongoing sin in the life of a believer and does not foreclose forgiveness for besetting problems. It does not turn up the screws over time until a person cannot take it anymore and wants to do anything but hear the word Jesus again. So what does a religion of low anthropology look like? I'm going to describe my vision of it, and it's one that I think we've been wrapped in for the last couple days, and you sort of can feel your shoulders unknot. First, a religion of low anthropology holds a nosebleed high view of God. To the extent that we are small, God is large. The way we talk about it is a low anthropology creates or at least it is paired with a high Christology. A high anthropologist looks to God as helper or guiding force, but in the long run has a hard time remembering him as Savior. A religion of low anthropology understands that God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. He forgives, he saves, he resurrects. And more than being someone to emulate, Jesus delivers those who fail to emulate him with any consistency. Like in this meme. Kind of a visual thing, you have to see it. That's one of those cool irons at the bottom. A low anthropology is therefore not shy about that word salvation. My father, Paul Zahl, he articulated that inverse relationship. The lower your anthropology, the higher your Christology will be. But a religion of low anthropology is not shy about sanctification either. It simply puts the onus on God to do the growing. He is the gardener who cultivates the soil of our hearts and makes the rain fall. You might say that a low anthropologist, as we'll hear, as I've sort of learned from the next speaker, Stephen Paulson, a low anthropologist holds God to his promises rather than attempt to usurp the reins. As such, a religion of low anthropology ultimately boasts a more optimistic and hopeful view of change than its alternatives. The power to heal and make right lies with God and is not subject to the vicissitudes of human vision and vigor and appetite. I mean, yesterday on the way from the airport, I stopped at some taco place that I'd been recommended. And let me tell you, my ability to have any kind of moral agency the rest of the day was diminished because I ate a burrito the size of a baby. You know, I'm only now coming back to life. God uses human vision, uses human vigor, and appetites perhaps, but he's not dependent on them. Secondly, a religion of low anthropology does not recalibrate the law of God or propagate rumors, cruel rumors about the human ability to fulfill it. Instead, it allows God's voice to speak at full volume to provoke what Giles Fraser, an English writer, calls a crisis of capacity. He says, Jesus wants us to feel that we cannot do what morality demands, and he does so because he's pointing to something beyond morality. This is true. I think Jesus knows that telling people to have faith doesn't do all that much. He knows that only when we have exhausted our own capacities will we look with faith toward the horizon, or look to the horizon, period. Only when we've been unburdened by our illusions about what we feel we, quote unquote, deserve will we appreciate what we've been given. So in this sense, perhaps a religion of low anthropology understands that Christ confronts us with our limits to engineer a situation in which the phrase, what is impossible with man is possible with God, might find traction. Faith in God begins where faith in oneself ends. Thirdly, a religion of low anthropology does not shy away from death. If anything, it will highlight the tragic dimension of life in a way that some people might hear as a downer. Those who are already down, however, whom Robert Farrar Capon calls the last, lost, least, little, and dead, will feel recognized, welcomed, and comforted. This is why a religion of low anthropology tends to resonate with those who find themselves defeated by life, rather than those on the upswing. Those whom life has forcibly divested of illusion and idealism relish the sympathy they hear in a message that takes into account the shipwrecks of life. People like that, people like you, people like me, people naturally gravitate away from messages about participation and partnership towards ones about absolution, reconciliation, and resurrection. At least they've lived a little bit. So a religion of low anthropology resists the urge to move past the human need for forgiveness and mercy, confident that on some level, everyone always requires as much. Sings the same song of God's grace over and over again, with the knowledge that regardless of how privileged or together we may appear, a low anthropology maintains that we are all in some kind of pain and desperate for the same amount of love, which is 100%. I love how Christ deals with the crowds in Matthew. You know the line from Matthew 9:36? When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. This is the great beauty of the gospel. That those who feel harassed and helpless and like sheep without a shepherd are not met with condemnation and blame, but are rescued like the sheep in this next meme. You know it. Right? Here we have again, though, an explosion of laughter. I don't mean to drain the joke of its humor, but we feel recognized. The person, this sheep needs to be saved, not once, but immediately again, after being saved through the monergistic work of that young boy who pulls the sheep up and watches as it learns nothing. And in fact, heads straight on into its demise. But do you think the sheep, he left it there? I don't think so. No. I'll close with a little passage from the book, towards the end of the book. It's about just how much this kind of view of the world and of reality and the gospel makes all the difference. In 2011, Chris Arnade quit his job on Wall Street, trading bonds, and went to photograph the residents of Hunts Point in the Bronx, New York, one of the most downtrodden neighborhoods in the United States. It's known primarily as a destination for drug use and prostitution. He presumed going in that the street dwellers of Hunts Point would confirm his cynicism about life. After all, they knew full well how unfair and cruel the world could be. Surely their daily crash course in low anthropology would have led them to concur with Arnade's own atheistic view of the world. But what he found shocked him. Yes, he found opioids and abuse. Yes, he found depression and mental illness and people broken by oppression. But he also found person after person filled to bursting with faith in God and a deep conviction about the reality of evil. If anything, belief in God bloomed more brightly as circumstances grew more dire. Arnade confessed, "Soon I saw my atheism for what it is, an intellectual belief most accessible to those who have done well." Arnade didn't stop in the Bronx. He decided to traverse the United States and get to know those living in the overlooked crannies of America. He calls this hidden and thoroughly unglamorous world of the left behind and overlooked, the, quote, back row America. This is a section of society for whom the claims of high anthropology, you can do it. Trust your intuition. Follow your dreams. Ring particularly hollow. The only institutions serving these populations with any effectiveness are those with a low anthropology. Arnaid writes, in the minds of many back row Americans, the only places on the streets that regularly treat them like humans, that offer them a seat to sit in, an ear to listen, and really understand the past, their past, are churches. They say, enter as you are, letting forgiveness wash away a past that many want gone. The churches understand the streets, understand everyone is a sinner and everyone fails. In their mind, those in back row America, the rest of the world, the courts, the hospitals, the rehab clinics, the welfare office, police stations, even some of the nonprofits and schools do not understand that. This doesn't mean that a church that espouses a low anthropology isn't a space of moral concern. After all, these are precisely the sorts of churches, both the storefront and limestone variety, that feed the hungry and clothe the homeless in places where no one else will. They also provide a crucial community of support as members recover from various addictions. They do the work. But that's not all they do. A church with a low anthropology, and I would add to that, a nonprofit ministry with a low anthropology, is a place to bring your failures and your shame. It is a place to lay those things down, to hear about second chances and third chances and fourth chances. It is a place to go and not be turned away, no matter how overwhelming your limitations are, by what forms your self-centeredness has expressed itself, or how much damage your doubleness has done. Even more than a place to come together, it is a place to fall apart. There's always room for a few more faces. If you get lost on the way, that's okay. Most people do. The doors will still be open when you arrive. Just look for the inscription, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Or, if you prefer it in the pre-internet form of memeing, you might find a sign like this outside. Amen. Thank you for listening.